What's up guys, my name's Alex and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about 5 common budgeting mistakes that make it seem harder to get ahead. Let's get into the video. So mistake number 1 is guessing at monthly costs. Everyone when they start budgeting kind of just sort of puts a bit of a breakdown together of what they think they spend per week or per month. They'll usually just kind of assume how much they spend on food, how much they spend on clothing and all those kind of things. That's not a very good way to go about budgeting, because you actually need to look at concrete evidence of what you literally have been spending over the past 3 or 6 months so that you can start to track what are the actuals. Because by guessing, we kind of have a bit of a bad memory when it comes to these things as people, and we kind of only assume it's a bit better than it actually is when we look at the nitty-gritty details. So by guessing at your monthly costs, you're not able to actually realize where your money's going and what parts of it you aren't realizing you're spending it on, or that you're overspending it on, which is where you're going to make the most gains by assessing your money like that. So the solution for this would be to print out between 3 and 6 months of your bank and credit statements. Go through those literally line by line, highlight everything that you have to, work out where exactly your money is going, and as you put your budget together, break that up into the relevant categories such as travel expenses, food expenses, clothing, entertainment, that kind of thing. And then you just need to really just track it together, make sure that you're tracking those actual expenses, and then only when you have accurate data to work off, then you can work on improving your situation because you have accurate things to compare against. So number 2 on our list of budgeting mistakes is not having an emergency fund. So an emergency fund, if you're not aware, is essentially an amount of money you keep in either in cash, in some form of high interest savings account, or in some kind of very easily accessible and stable investment that you can pull out basically at any time with literally no notice, convert it straight to cash, and then you shouldn't be storing it anywhere that it could lose value in the short term. So this is not money that you would be investing, this isn't money that you're focused on getting the most out of return-wise as possible. It's simply money that you have there in an emergency in case you need it, to avoid yourself having to either eat into your long-term investments, or even worse, having to go into debt such as with a credit card to cover an emergency. So some common examples of emergency funds would usually dictate to have between 3 and 6 months of expenses saved up. It kind of depends on your living situation. For example, if you're a student living at home, having 6 months of expenses saved up probably doesn't apply to you, because nothing that catastrophic could probably happen that it would take you that long to recover. Maybe for that circumstance you might be fine with 3 months, but if you're someone that, you know, they've got a young family and maybe you have 2 investment properties, you might want 6, maybe even more months worth of emergency funds saved up in case you lose your job, or you're having some health issues, or having some car troubles and you need some major repairs done. The worst thing that you can do is not have an emergency fund, because if you're trying to invest and save money and budget and save over here, all the good work that you've been doing, maybe potentially for months or years, saving money up, stashing it away, putting it in investments, you know, if you have one bad thing come up, like a health scare or a car breakdown, like I said, and you need to dig into, you know, several thousands of dollars potentially to cover that expense, the worst thing you can do is, you know, having to pull money out of your investments at potentially a sub-ample time, where you might actually be down on those investments, or you might not have realized enough gains to cover your transaction costs yet. Or even worse, if your money's in something like real estate, it can take months to get the money out. So that's something you really want to be able to avoid. So of course the solution of this, like I said, is to actually have an emergency fund in place. Depending on your life circumstances, goals, and what you've got going on will determine how big of an emergency fund you want to have together. And really you just need to make sure that you have this in place so that you aren't going and selling investments or fire selling investments in an emergency, which can hurt you in 2 ways, because obviously you're losing the gains of those investments, you're losing the time you put into those investments, and even worse, you kind of lose that whole momentum as well. So you want to keep all that sorted for yourself, for your financial future, so that you don't get into any bad circumstances moving forward if things do go south temporarily. So our third budgeting mistake that people tend to make is not leaving themselves any fun money. This is a really critical one, and this is what I think makes a lot of people sort of fail a couple of weeks or months into a bit of a budgeting exercise for themselves. And that's because they don't leave themselves some money to have fun with. When you start getting into budgeting and you really want to tighten the belt on your finances, probably the most tempting thing to do is say, well, I don't need to go to the movies, I don't need to go out for dinner, I can do all of this stuff at home, you know, I can download movies from the internet for free, yada yada. Sure, that may be true, but you have to leave yourself some fun money for some experiences, to go and bond with people, make new relationships. If you're not leaving yourself any money to go and have fun, and you're just trying to basically save 100% of what you can, yes, you'll get slightly ahead, but you'll probably find it's a bit of a diminishing return. You know, if you free up, you know, a few percent of your money per month, or whatever that may be dollar-wise, depending on your situation, you'll find that you'll be so much happier, rewarded, and you'll be able to form better and closer bonds and friendships with people just by leaving yourself a little bit of money to go out to dinner or do these things. And you don't want to seem like the kind of guy that's always holding back, you know. You want to be smart with your money, you want to be frugal where you can, but you don't want to be that guy that goes out to dinner with some friends and they're all, you know, if everyone offers to shout around of drinks, you don't want to be the one sitting there quietly in the corner, you know, hoping no one looks at you, because they're going to remember, they're going to know, it's going to reflect badly on you. You want to really be smart with your money so that you can use it wisely and so that you can use it to benefit yourself and those around you. So I don't think you should be hoarding it like that, and I think the best way to go about it is to set yourself a little bit of allowance for fun. And if you don't use it, or if you think you want to use it on something that's a lot more expensive than you can afford in the month, for example, you might find it wise to actually save some of that fun allowance over a couple of months and let it accrue a little bit. Then you can use it on slightly bigger splurges as well. So that's something I like to do as well. You know, just take for example, say I have $200 a month I can spend on fun. If I want to, you know, do something, buy a ticket somewhere that's $300, you know, I'll just take it a little bit easier the month or two before and just save that little bit extra, and then I know I've got that buffer in place where I can splurge a little bit here every now and then. Doesn't hurt in the budget in the long run, really. You know, a couple of $100 a month or a year, you know, yeah, it might end up being a few $1,000s, but you know, if it keeps that drive going, keeps you happy, I think it's more than worth it. And if you're actually being smart by having a budget in place and you're following it accurately, I think the gains from everywhere else is going to more than make up for that. No problem at all. So the fourth budgeting mistake that people make is not comparing their actual spending with their anticipated spending over time. So sure, you can do your budgeting, you can start expecting and planning for what you're going to spend, and yes, as I recommended, you should be going back before you even start a budget and looking at those 3 to 6 months of expenses beforehand so you can accurately start predicting and planning your budget. But after you've got that in place, every couple of months or weeks even, you want to come back, reassess, compare again, take those bank statements again, fresh copies, compare it against your budget and see how you're tracking, because things change. You might find that, okay, I'm actually doing really well now, I've managed to drop my food bill even more than I thought now that I'm a bit more conscious of it. Maybe that means that I can adjust my budget expectations, and then it actually frees up things elsewhere where I found I wasn't doing a very good job of sticking to my budget. Maybe I can adjust. So I think it's one of the most beneficial things in all areas of life, really, to be constantly measuring and improving against where you were before, just so that you can improve and make things better for yourself. Because if you're ignorant to where things are now versus where they were, all you can really do is go off old data, which is constantly getting more and more outdated. You want to be with it, you want to know where things are going, you want to have ideas of trends so that you can actually catch things before they become bad, or so you can recognize things when they're going well. That lets you have the power to make decisions with knowledge. So I think it's very, very important that you track and compare actuals with expectations over time. So our fifth and final budgeting mistake, this one is honestly a really, really big one for me actually, is not focusing on big ticket items and expenses. The reason this bugs me is because every time I've read a blog post about saving money or budgeting, or even YouTube videos I've watched about how to save money and this and that, and the whole culture around it seems to really focus on depriving yourselves of the little things, nickel and diming yourself, you know, not buying a coffee because that $4 can, you know, compound into $27 30 years from now. Sure, that's great, but what the things you really need to look at first and most critically are things like your car insurance, your medical insurance, you know, rent, living costs like that. You know, could you live somewhere else and save $100, $200 a week on your rent or your mortgage? Or, you know, could you downsize your car and save $100 a month on insurance? That was the case for me, for example. You know, you can only not drink so many coffees to kind of work back that money, but if you can cut out $100, $200 like that, it's just such a bigger saving with so much little stress on your plate for having to withdraw from something. I think those little joys, you know, something like drinking the occasional coffee, there's a social aspect to that. You know, I don't think you should cut that out as a blanket rule. Of course, be frugal, don't go overboard with it. You know, you don't need to buy one every day or twice a day, for example, but, you know, limiting yourself just for the monetary reasons not to have an experience like that where you could make, you know, 2 or 3 times the saving by changing your insurer, for example. Those are the big ticket items people need to focus on when they're budgeting, because that's the stuff that really destroys your budget. If you look at where most people's money goes, you'll generally find that, you know, living expenses or housing living expenses are usually 50% of what they spend their money on in the first place, sometimes more than that. So if you can get those big things down by, you know, 5-10%, that's a considerable amount of money in the long term and across your actual budget. So focus on those areas rather than on the little areas, and over time, obviously you want to pay attention to both, but if you can take care of those big areas, you'll find that they really take care of everything else for you for the most part. And if you want to be a bit of an overachiever with it, of course, go a little bit harder on the small stuff, but I wouldn't start there, and I certainly wouldn't go too hard there, especially without paying attention to the big stuff, as I said. So that's all for today, guys. I wanted to keep this a fairly concise video. I hope these 5 budgeting tips that I've brought to your attention are helpful to you, and I hope that you haven't fallen into any of these traps. But if you have, you're now aware of them, and you can now move forward knowing what to look out for. So once again, guys, my name's Alex. I'll have a blog article linked in relation to this topic in the description. Please consider subscribing if you want more videos on personal finance, investing and money, and like the video as well if you found it helpful. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.